Hello and welcome back to the Progress Report. I'm your host, Tom Rourke.
And today we're going to be talking about
Agentic AI, and more specifically, Agentic AI in the context of modernization, and how some of those things that we hadn't previously been able to do we're now suddenly embracing. But it brings up all kinds of issues in terms of how we let Agentic AI loose on what we would typically have called our crown jewels. I'm delighted to be joined today by two experts in the field, and I want to make sure I get their titles right here. We have a colleague from Amazon Web Services, Nenad Joshi, who is a senior AI solutions architect for EMEA, specializing in agentic AI and all kinds of interesting things in this space. And also my own colleague, Logan Wolfe, who is a partner in global enterprise transformation, but specializing in AI and tech strategy here at Kyndryl. So Nenad and Logan, you're both very welcome to the Progress Report.
It's good to be here, Tom.
Yeah. So let's get right into it. I'm super interested in the topic around modernization, because it strikes me that it's one of those spaces where we've had a whole series of well understood but too difficult to handle problems that suddenly are within reach. And I wonder maybe if I could just ask, what is it that has made this moment possible? And what are some of those things that it's beginning to create as interesting issues to discuss today? Nenad.
Previously, before the Gen AI era, it was all about taking data to AI. So you had the ETL, you have to pre-process the data, fetch that, and then make it ready so that AI can consume it. But now it's completely flipped. Now you have AI coming to the data directly because of the AI agents. Organizations don't have to waste time anymore in accessing the data. Of course, it opens a whole new Pandora box altogether, which is about how do you do it responsibly? How do you make sure that the right guardrails are in place, there's right observability in place, and right security policies are in place?
Yeah, I think it's a few things that you've alluded to, Tom, as well. So agentic AI forces the conversation because it doesn't just sort of provide insights, it makes decisions, right? And so the moment a system is making decisions that affect employees' workflows or customers' outcomes or regulated data, et cetera, you're kind of entering that trust territory, whether you plan to or not. And so I think a lot of leaders are asking, instead of just asking, how do we modernize our technology? Now the question is, how do we modernize it while keeping our people, customers, and regulators with us, right? Fundamentally, and that's a sort of a different problem that I think a lot of organizations are just gearing up to solve, right, from their readiness perspective of their systems.
I mean, it's when you talk about readiness, I'm old enough to remember when people began connecting their back end systems to the internet and sort of exposing things to customers. What it was like, we'd all take for granted now that we can look into our own bank account online, but that was a huge step for organizations. But one of the things that we discovered during that phase was that actually people had underestimated the extent to which their staff were masking issues with their systems. So, systems were essentially incomplete or potentially inaccurate, but actually the customer experience and the business was then protected because there was a whole series of layers of experienced expert people in front of those systems with tacit knowledge. And I'm interested, is that a problem that just simply no longer exists, or does the application of agentic AI to our systems actually again re-expose that problem, that in business there's so many things that actually human beings are tacitly compensating for that just may not be captured when we go to modernize directly using agentic AI?
Most enterprises are not as integrated as their org chart can suggest, right, for this agentic transformation. And so, you have data living in silos. You have processes that are encoded in people's heads, not in documented workflows. You have accountability that can be diffused. And so when an agentic system tries to operate across those boundaries, because that's where the value is in a lot of cases, it exposes every integration debt the organization has been carrying, right? But here's the flip side of that. So in that sense, deploying agentic AI is one of the best diagnostic tools an enterprise leader has, right? If the pilot to production journey is painful, it's really telling you something important about your architecture and your operational model and about your organization that you probably needed to know anyway. And so in a lot of cases, it becomes this sort of organizational transformation and kind of leadership journey as opposed to a technology modernization journey.
Yeah, and I guess, Niraj, your Logan mentioned architecture. I mean, I'm really interested in the architect's view of this situation, because on a previous episode, we were talking to somebody from a bank recently, and they were really clear to say, like, this is definitely the era of the architect. That getting your architecture right has never been more important. And we've gone through a whole phase of people experimenting with the things they could do, but now where it gets real, architecture becomes super important. And maybe you'd like to expand a little on that.
I think I fully agree with Logan's point over there is about breaking down every process, whether that process is first of all needed or not. And this is how the approach, that is something we are seeing a lot of enterprise customers are trying to transform, because this is the biggest question for them. Like, okay, I had a recruiting process, or I had a customer onboarding process. This is typical workflow. These are some typical workflows even relevant for FSI customers as well. So how do I transform that process? So for them, it was like, okay, how does this process likes today? What are the critical steps? What is the characteristic or the nature of each step? Whether it's a recurring one, is it something which can be done at scale? Say if it's a invoice ingestion step that is going on. This is a monotonous task that you can do at scale. So what is a potential agentic pattern that can mimic that?
To Ninad's point, there's a kind of a step-by-step process in implementing these systems. Like, first of all, you want to make sure that, again, your data, your infrastructure can support an effective use of AI systems. The second one is built-in governance controls, and that's across identity, that's across auditability, it's across policies, etc. Right? It needs to be a fundamental architectural point, and then really all of your future agentic use cases can stand on top of that, right? But then you need a certain, let's say, decision authority sort of approach, right? You can start by defining 3 tiers, which is like, tier 1 is low risk, reversible, high confidence actions that an agent can take autonomously. Tier 2 can be medium risk actions where the agent acts after a defined escalation window with no intervention was identified. And the third one is high impact or irreversible decisions that should always require human authorization and human in the loop, right? But even just categorizing your workflows and processes into these 3 levels, that takes a certain introspection from a company's perspective, right? Especially if they're sort of multidimensional and they connect different departments. And again, that's where a lot of value is. Like, if you're trying to connect your HR kind of workflows with your financial workflows, et cetera, right? And so it's just really it's a readiness exercise, and it's a transformative exercise that's really way above technology domain. And so that phased implementation approach through sort of like, from idea to pilot to kind of user acceptance testing to production, et cetera, with governance built in at every stage, is something that takes a high degree of organizational maturity from the process perspective, not just technology perspective.
So Ninad, given that, in the work that you do, are there any patterns beginning to emerge in terms of those organizations who seem most ready to actually embrace this and to move forward? Are there any kind of common threads that help identify those organizations that are actually more likely to embrace this?
There are certain organizations who are still experimenting. They are doing a lot of POCs, but they're not seeing them converting into productions. This is particularly stemming in from is like, okay, there is some new hyperbolic model out there in the market. They're trying it. Oh, this is something cool. And then they will keep experimenting around it. Then there are some companies who are actually transforming the whole business workflow. Some of them are really transforming how their day-to-day work looks like. And a key differentiator between these two is they have been able to bridge some critical steps. Some of these elements, like even Logan also mentioned about observability, governance, and everything in place. But the biggest differentiator that was there was both kind of personas had a POC, but the one who got succeeded with the POC was when they were even attempting the POC, they agreed on how their success of that POC looks like. And this is a single biggest factor, because a lot of POCs start with the enthusiasm of the tech teams, and they end up being stuck because they are not being translated enough to be into a business ROI. And this is where the gap is there. And the teams who have been able to bridge this gap successfully, which is even if they were starting POC, they rightly aligned on those ROIs or success metrics they would like to achieve. They were the ones who were actually then able to see like, okay, this POC was a success for us in this scenario. Let's try to make it available for other organizations. Let's try to have a slightly enterprise platform based approach. Let's build a nice landing zone, agentic landing zone or a Gen AI landing zone, and then let's make it available throughout the organization so that our guardrails and everything is enforced.
Ultimately, we're entering into the environment now where ROI from these initiatives is the number one priority, right? And so AI is being looked at as just one of the tools in the toolkit, which I think is a very healthy way to look at it, right? A lot of leaders are starting to ask themselves, well, what's the right measure of using AI? Like the specific example of that would be, do we need an LLM? And if so, should it be an LLM off the shelf, like one of the leading models? So should it be perhaps an open source model? Should it be something air gapped? Or even further, should it be a small language model, right? So now we're going to see some targeted tools deployed for specific use cases and where it's fit for purpose.
I sense the other issue here is as you rightly mentioned, is about trust, and trust in a lot of industries is very heavily related to the relationship with regulators and regulated industries. I mean, to what extent is the regulatory environment that people are operating in either a barrier to, or is it essentially becoming supportive of the greater use of agentic AI solutions?
So regulations are rarely a direct enabler of technology, right? Like ultimately, you have some, hoops to jump through, right? But then it is a driver of responsible implementation of that technology. And that's really what we want. I think we're seeing organizations that are stopping to treat trust, thankfully, as a compliance layer alone, and they're treating it as a first class design principle, right, when it comes to agentic systems. So that's across, let's say, identity, that's across explainability, that's across accountability. And it's no wonder that that's the case. I'll give you one statistic. I was reading a Palo Alto article, and it identified the following number. So they said that in organizations with an advanced degree of AI implementation, the ratio of agents to humans is 82-1, right? And so that sounds maybe even a little bit conservative. I've read number as high as 200-1. And managing even human identities can be a very daunting task for organizations. Once an employee leaves, sometimes the identity lingers. It could be leveraged for an attack vector, et cetera, right? So for agents, it is much less codified than that still. And so building that, whether that's mandated by regulations or just outright, responsible attitude towards these systems, from an identity lifecycle management to explainability, accountability, policy control, et cetera. So this is very much something that I think is going to set apart organizations that will, keep that integration productively in the future, and the ones that will effectively, face certain penalties by either customers or the market themselves. There are some concerns, there are some blockers, right? And in a lot of cases, it's talent anxiety because, and I'm not just talking about the typical AI will take our jobs kind of situation, which is, valid to an extent, but now there's also, let's say AI doesn't take my job, right? But how do I adapt to an environment where agentic AI is now a day-to-day part of my reality and my workflows and my role, right? And it's a big upskilling, reskilling in some functions much harder than others. And so it becomes a human enablement question, and it's just as important as the technical architecture.
In both of your experience, what are the persistent concerns that people are expressing that are somehow holding them back from fully embracing? Like, what are those concerns, and potentially what are some of the solutions to those concerns?
So there are multiple reasons we have seen. Of course, sovereign AI, the residency of where the AI is hosted, how it is being, how is it being provided, is a big concern between a lot of customers. The data residency of it is a big element to it, and these are some of the challenges that we are seeing as one of the key blockers. And the more and more, say, at least I can say for example, in case of Amazon Bedrock, I think that was the biggest differentiator of all the models that was coming in was, okay, if you have a customer in EMEA, or if you have a demand, you want to have an endpoint in EMEA, you have a locally hosted endpoint that is there. So that addresses, that concern is addressed now. But okay, now the next question is about how my data is going to get treated. Okay, so your data never leaves the geo. So okay, the data is still within within the region, and if in region it's there, so it addresses a lot of legal concerns and those kind of concerns as well. And then okay, let's start talking about like, okay, how the PII information, what are the different guardrails, how do you ensure that AI is behaving responsibly. So that's where you have guardrails and other elements coming in together, where you're addressing the issues like toxicity, PII reduction, and all those elements that are coming in. And when you put all these things together, that's where I think the workable solutions that starts coming in, and the organizations who have been able to address these concerns altogether are the ones who are eventually seeing the success.
I just wanted to touch on sovereignty quickly as well. I mean, sovereignty, we see this a lot coming up in my work at Kyndryl. And so that's also becoming an architectural principle because data is a huge component of it, where it lives, of course, but it gets so much more nuanced. I mean, it's who can get access to that data through customer-controlled encryption keys. I guess the question of sovereignty is, are we able to operate our business without undue foreign influence, right, to it across data, operations, and technology, right? And so the trade-off in a lot of places becomes, well, how do we want to trade off sovereignty versus innovation? And so that's an interesting trade-off to navigate. Do we want to use cutting-edge models of the latest generation, or do we want to hold back on that and deploy something that's completely on-premises, completely air-gapped, things like that? And so this is where also regulations come in, right? In Europe, and in Europe, for example, you have the Cloud and AI Development Act, which is coming into play soon. That's going to control that to a large extent. DORA on the financial side. So I think, again, I think it's basically a paradigm shift where organizations have to look at these things not as a compliance sort of, checkbox type exercise, but, these are the type of things that are expected from an enterprise in 2026 when it comes to AI, and they have to build them in.
I think I just wanted to add on Logan's point over there was, irrespective of whatever regulations that are coming in, and they will keep coming in. So it's not gonna just stop here or say in a couple of years. It will just come as the AI tries to evolve as well over the period of time. But the organizations who have observability in place, like okay, if you are able to just observe how your AI is whatever output that your AI is putting out, it will give you the ability to have the right governance on it. So say if there is some kind of restriction, you would like your AI to behave in a way, that is something can be done easily then afterwards. It's more of an engineering problem afterwards if you have the right observability in place. So that is also something which is also going to remain very important.
As being the progress report, we always like to talk a little bit about the future, and specifically what progress looks like for our guests. Given your work and given the field and given the pace of change, I mean, what for you would look like positive progress over the next couple of years in the context of AI and its application to our real world problems?
Every workflow that you're seeing around you today has a potential to be disrupted. So that is something I'm looking at the like how the future is going to look like. And AI is agentic AI particularly is not one particular state, like okay, it's a fully autonomous state. It's not like that. It's rather a spectrum. It's a mix of rules-based automation at the basic, maybe have some chat-based assistants or something like, or some very basic solution implementation, all the way to autonomous. So there is a lot of space that is there, and how you are able to adopt to it, which kind of element you are adopting your organization into, is something that which will determine how effective it is. So quite bullish on it and pretty excited for it.
Logan, what's your view of progress, what it looks like in the next couple of years?
If I'm really going to put my futurist hat on, we're seeing a convergence of really, really tectonic trends in the next decade or so that will be commercialized, and are each self-propelling. And so, but also they're interacting with one another. And so first is AI. Second is potential for cold fusion energy, right? I mean, I'm hopeful, right? And third is quantum computing. So that's increasing computational capacity just absolutely exponentially. So if you combine these three trends, then we are looking at either an immensely utopian future where humans, the era of exploration and scientific progress and anything you can possibly imagine, healthcare, finance, everything just explodes in the best sense possible. Or we're looking at a highly competitive environment where it's just going to be essentially a dystopian hellscape. Now, which one it's going to be, I suppose we'll find out. I'm trying to be hopeful for the former.
I perhaps sort of started with you, Logan, and had Nina bring the optimism for her close, but I think it's a very valid perspective. And I think I'm heartened, though, by the number of people who are emerging as leaders certainly in our organizations, who have a view around the importance of ethics in this space, importance of understanding, human evolution, human thought processes. So I have to say thank you both for the conversation this afternoon. It feels like with every one of these, it's a topic that you want to return to see how it played out in a matter of months. But thank you both for your perspectives. Ninad, Logan, thank you for joining the Progress Report.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
So yet another fascinating conversation about the pace at which AI is transforming how we do business, and in this instance, how it's really getting to grips with some of the real world challenges we've struggled with for a while around the modernization of our systems. I'm sure we could return to this topic many times, but hopefully you found today's discussion insightful. And if you have, please do like, share, and subscribe to the Progress Report.